And welcome everyone to our second session, Enhancing Your Security Toolkit. On Monday, Matt and I had a presentation on the #1 risk in cybersecurity, which is phishing. So we chose to spend that hour focused right on phishing and what you can do to avoid catching fish inappropriately. And today we wanted to talk about tools that you can use to prevent your business from getting breached from a cybersecurity perspective. So today we'll introduce ourselves and then we'll walk through why cybersecurity is important, and then we'll be taking a look at what the toolkit is, what you could bring into your cybersecurity toolkit. And we'll have some time for questions, and then at the bottom of the slide you can see we did pre-record session 1, and that will be available on the Venture Cafe website. And on Friday we're doing another webinar on working with your partners, so who are outside companies you can work with to shore up your cybersecurity landscape. So my name is Meredith Carroll, and I work with Vertical 6, a managed services provider out of Warwick, Rhode Island. I've been in technology for over 20 years in a consulting role. Started out on the road working with enterprise organizations, mostly in email and messaging and collaboration. And then finally made it back to Rhode Island, where I grew up, and started working with Vertical 6 in the small to medium-sized business space as a VCIO for many of those organizations. I also have a certification as a certified information systems auditor, so security is kind of where I focus with a lot of my clients.
Hi everybody, I'm Matt Leathers. I've been a consultant across large companies and small companies for the last 20 years. And I think as we've seen the security landscape evolve and security become important, not just to large enterprises and businesses, but to small enterprises and businesses, one of the things that Meredith and I and the folks at Venture Cafe have talked about is how do we make sure that small businesses, which are the backbone of our economy here in Rhode Island and in many other areas, how do we make sure that they are safe and secure? And so we focus on making sure this is actionable, practical advice. We're not going to create a lot of fear. We're not going to scare you and then leave you worried. Our goal here is that by the time we're finished with the session, that you have learned a few things and you are smarter and safer. And so on that front, we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. The fact of the matter is that security is a fairly significant concern for a lot of you out there. And it's also a concern for your customers and for your partners, whether they are supply chain partners or potentially your business customers. And so in a sense, if you listen to the phishing and the phishing prevention session earlier in the week, you already have an understanding that 91% of the volume for a cyber attack is going to come through a message trying to get you to click on a link or download a file. And so the idea is that one bad click could ruin a business, which seems pretty scary. And on the left-hand side, you have some examples of Walmart and Target made the headlines, and significant breaches. In the case of Walmart, 1.3 million customers had their private information, their card data, their personal data, their home address data stolen because a jewelry supplier had left an online database open and unsecured. And the Target breach was much larger and much bigger, where in the case of the Target breach, they're actually able to attack the cash registers and the point of sale devices at Target. And both of those started off with small businesses that really were not IT companies at all. But the fact of the matter is, yes, there are some concerns. This is something that small businesses have to take seriously. But there are also there are books of knowledge, there's bases of knowledge that are out there to help and specifically support small businesses. And so there are other sources out there, but we are going to focus on practical advice to help you protect your business.
I think, Matt, we talked a little bit about phishing is the #1 risk, but the tools that we're going to talk about today are general cybersecurity best practices. So it is not just phishing that we're focusing on, but because it is the single biggest risk out there, that was the one that we focused on Monday. But these tools are applicable across the board for all manner of security protections. Excuse me. So here we have a slide that really shows a bird's eye view of your business, looking at the elements that play into what you have and what you're trying to protect. So in the middle is sort of the elements of your environment, including your devices. So that's your PCs, your tablets, your phones, all those kinds of things. Email, which we focused quite a bit on in the phishing session, because phish usually try to get into the organization through email. You have your network in the middle there, all of your switches and your routers, all that core connectivity equipment that you have. Applications. So you might be using QuickBooks or QuickBooks Online. You may have an ERP system or CRM. And then, of course, you have your browsers where you're accessing the internet. So your Chrome, your Firefox, your Microsoft Edge, hopefully not Internet Explorer anymore, because that is now going end of life with Microsoft. So, the three that we primarily see are Firefox, Chrome, and now Edge. On the bottom, we show your data. So there's your core business data, so your operations data. You have your customer data. So, when we work with a client, we have their network diagrams and all those sorts of things in our environment. So it's important for us to protect our customer data. And then, of course, your financial data. So whatever's sitting in your payroll system, in your QuickBooks, and whatever you're using to manage your finances. And then, of course, on the top, you have outside entities that you're working with, possibly have connections with, but certainly your data integrity and your security are very important to your customers, your partners, and your suppliers. We are also seeing quite a bit now that in the supply chain space, if you're a supplier to a Walmart, Walmart is now auditing businesses in their supply chain to be sure that they are meeting certain security standards. So we're going to see more and more that customers, partners, and suppliers are really looking to make sure that their customers, partners, and suppliers are adhering to great security best practices.
And I think that's maybe a way to look at this in a positive light, because if you have a reputation and your business has a reputation for protecting customers and their information, and being a reliable partner or being a reliable supplier, then that actually will lead to certainly protecting your existing customer base and your existing business revenue opportunities. But another way to look at this is it's almost like the good housekeeping seal of approval. If you are known and you have a reputation for security, not just physical security, but information security, and you pass the regulatory reviews or the audits that will be conducted with more frequency, as Meredith mentioned, then this can be something you can be proud of instead of being worried about it.
Absolutely. And I think if you haven't seen this coming already, you're definitely going to see it coming from those entities that you work with outside your organization. And it's, we'll talk, I think, on Friday about outside audit, but it can be a great idea to engage an auditor to come review your environment and give you the assurances from a third party that your environment's in good shape.
Meredith, I think that Vertical 6 is going through this process, right?
We sure are. We're working on a SOC audit, which will be a great thing for our company, Matt, to your point, that we will be able to tell our customers and our prospective customers that we have been through a SOC audit, which will be quite an achievement for us.
So as we start working through the toolkit, one thing to note is we've shied away from making specific recommendations in terms of software applications, but we're giving you ideas, and we're giving you essentially a shopping list and a checklist. So this will build up into a overall shopping list. So for now, probably listen, and then we'll cover out the to-dos and the action items as we get closer to the end of our session today. But in terms of backups, there are two major concepts to think about here. How much information can you afford to go without? And how soon do you need access back to that information? And those can be summarized and described as two a little wonky terms. There's your recovery point objective. And so your recovery point objective is simply how much information can I afford to lose? You know, can I lose a day's worth of work and that be okay? Can I lose a week's worth of work and that be okay? And that could be sales data, that could be shipping data, or it could just be like, if you're somebody like me, a lot of Microsoft Office documents. And that's going to depend on your staff and your personnel. Marketing and salespeople, maybe that's a day or 2 days. For your finance team, maybe that's a little tighter, like a half day of invoice work or accounts payable work. But thinking through how much information, how much data could you afford to lose? And that may change by the different functions in your organization and your business. Each person may have a slightly different answer, but that gives you an overall perspective and a general perspective of what your recovery point objective would be. The second question is how long can you afford to be without the information? So it may be that you could lose a day's worth of information, but you would need access restored to those systems and to those solutions and tools, say in a shorter amount of time. You could only be down, you could only lose access to, say, your point of sale system, or to your accounting system, or to your customer sales or customer relationship management system for a few hours. So this question in terms of recovery time objective is how long can you kind of essentially be dead in the water? So based on those two questions, that's going to help you determine what your backup strategy should be. And backups are not optional. You should have a backup, and we'll talk about some of the types of backups. But these two questions start to understand and start to determine what your options are going to be, what the eventual solution that you pick would be, because they're going to be a cost and there's price associated with those. Obviously, the faster recovery point objectives, where every 5 minutes you're backing information up, and recovery time objectives that are aggressive and very short, those solutions tend to be a little more expensive. Not prohibitively so, but they do tend to make a difference in terms of price.
You know, and when we do a DR plan with a client, we're interviewing key stakeholders throughout that organization to find out what their RTO and RPOs are, because they can vary across lines of business, across applications, those sorts of things. But we're documenting with those key stakeholders what their objectives are, and then, as you mentioned, Matt, designing a solution that will meet those objectives. But again, you know, we talked about this last time. It's about balance, right? So we have to balance the cost with the backup objectives. And many times we see those objectives change based on the solutions and the costs associated with them. But it's really important to remember that when we're talking about specifically a recovery point objective, it's really how much productivity for your entire company can you stand to lose at one point. So if I have an organization that's 200 seats, is it okay for them to lose 2 days of data? Probably not, right? That's 400 days of work, or 800 days of work that we would lose, or math, something like that. But it's super important to be considering how much productivity would be lost in recreating that data. And you know, at Vertical 6, we talk about our number one job, our number 1, 2, 3 and jobs are being backup, backup, and backup, because backup is the key defense against any kind of cybersecurity incident or breach. If you get ransomware and you have a backup that is properly secured, it's kind of a non-event, right? There's a little disruption as we restore from backups, but the data is safe and we just move on. If there's no backups in place, or the backups are compromised because they weren't properly protected, it's going to be a different story. So best practices in backup is to have both an on-site copy and an off-site copy. So for the on-site copy, that's really if you have a problem with a physical device in your office, how fast do you need to be able to recover, and an on-site backup will help you recover more quickly. We recommend having a secondary server. So I have my production server and I have a backup and disaster recovery server. The BDR, as we call it, is generally a lower powered server. So I always say you run on your production server, you're probably going to walk on your disaster recovery server. But we want you to have another server sitting right next to your production box so that you can recover in the timeframes that you want to. Some organizations decide just to have some disks that are, you know, external and maybe in a different part of the office. Certainly that's a lower cost solution, but on the flip side, on the productivity side, if your primary server fails, there's a cost associated with the downtime. So that needs to get balanced. And the second one, offsite, absolutely critical that there is an offsite backup geographically distributed from where your offices are. So I don't want you to just have your backup sitting in the next office, because if there's a fire in the building, I'm going to lose both potentially. So we need to balance that risk as well. At Vertical 6, we store much of our clients' backup data in a data center here in Rhode Island, and we also replicate that data to a data center on the West Coast. So we have about 3,000 miles of geographical dispersion. I kind of always joke that if something happens in Providence that affects both our client's office and the data centers we're sitting in, we probably have a bigger issue at that point. But it is good in case of an electrical outage or a massive network outage, that we have that data also sitting on the West Coast. So some key points: we definitely want to be backing up automatically. So we're using tools to perpetuate those backups. We're not having to change USB drives connected to servers to get those backups going. USB drives getting connected and disconnected from servers fail quite frequently. And also people forget, or they get sick, or they're on vacation and the backups don't happen. So we want to have that automated. At Vertical 6, we are monitoring our clients' backups every day. We're getting reports overnight of any backups that failed from our systems, and then addressing those throughout the day. And again, for on-site backups, we know that they are going to be vulnerable to physical damage. So keep in mind, even inside the building where you're storing your on-site backup, we like to have it a little bit further away from the production servers if we can. But just be aware that if a sprinkler head is tripped and it comes down on your server and your backup, you're going to be restoring from your offsite copies. And then in the cloud, when we're doing our offsite backups, we have a lot of options for where we can store them. We have clients who might have 2 buildings that are geographically distributed, so they replicate their backups between them. Other clients are using Azure, which is Microsoft's shared cloud environment. And then we also have, as I mentioned, we have space in a data center here in Rhode Island where we store many of our clients' backups. So there's a lot of different options, but this is really going to come down to what are your RTO and RPO, and what's your tolerance around backup integrity. But again, this backup is first on the list because it is first on the list. It is the most critical thing we can do to protect from any kind of cybersecurity incident and any physical issues with the hardware that you're running your business off of.
I have a friend who's a photographer and was not necessarily in the habit of backing up their files and their images from previous shoots. But they did a pretty good job of say, once every few months, they would back up to a USB drive and put the USB drive in the drawer. Unfortunately, you kind of realized that wasn't sufficient for where they were as their business grew. So as their photography business became more profitable and they got more customers, we actually talked through, and this was just over drinks, we talked through a practice and a process where we had to automate that. And so using solutions like Dropbox, like Microsoft OneDrive, or even iCloud to automatically back up those images and those photographs so that they weren't dependent upon a USB drive in the drawer, which to Meredith's point happened to be right next to their workstation and their computer. So if there was a problem or if there was a fire in the house, not only would they not be able to work, but they would have lost everything. So in this case, it's a single proprietor, owner-operated business, working through and growing into improving and developing their own backup strategy as their business grew. And so that's fundamentally what we are trying to convey for all of you.
The OneDrives and Dropboxes, they're great. One thing to be a little careful of with them is that they only retain 30 days of changes.
Right,
so we have
and that's exactly. As their budget got a little bigger, they were able to migrate to a more robust professional grade solution.
Yeah, and there are certainly going to be regulatory issues as well to consider. If you're in banking or something like that, you have to make sure that you're retaining your data for X number of years. and even within your business, different data may need to be retained for a different amount of time.
That's right.
But at its core, what we really want to do is make sure you have a backup, make sure there's an on-site copy, an off-site copy, and that it's automated and protected.
Yes.
So content filtering. Content filtering really is using tools to make sure that you can't go where you're not supposed to go. So there are tools that can intercept your requests to a website, evaluate it, and then let you go to that site if it's a safe site, or block you from getting to it if it's a site that is known to be malicious. So content filters are terrific. We always have to remember with our tools, though, that they're only as good as what they know. So as we see malicious sites popping up very quickly, a content filter might not catch it if it's a so-called zero-day attack. And a zero-day attack is just a brand new attack that hasn't made it to the security filtering systems yet. But we use content filters at their core to stop people from getting to bad places. And your business can also use them to limit access to other sites that you might not want people going to. So you might not want people using social media in the office, or you might not want people looking at ESPN or any other number of sites that might be inappropriate in the workplace. So content filters can also do that. But I think the piece, Matt, that we're talking about today is stopping folks from getting to the malicious sites that are going to introduce malware into an environment.
Right, and we had a few examples from our phishing prevention session on Monday, where the site looked real, looked legitimate, and in those cases, a content filter may have been able to block some of those sites. So as we dig in here, remembering that even if people are aware and have been trained, they're not perfect. These tools, especially content filtering and some of the subsequent ones, are designed to help people even if they make a mistake, right? So we can't do it alone. So these tools are designed to help us, even if we click on a link or download a file.
Yeah, and we have a note here about pairing it with an acceptable use policy. Every organization should have a document that employees sign off on that tells them what is okay and what is not okay when using work resources or using your resources to do their work. So up front, people should be trained. They should know what they shouldn't be doing. But then we put these tools in the background to make sure that if they do something, that if they click on something that would introduce risk, that we can stop that before they download the malware.
And so as you're considering content filters, there's a few places to start and a few things to think about. There's the firewalls, and those can be firewalls for your office network as a whole, as well as firewalls onto individual machines. A number of manufacturers like Microsoft and Apple are now building firewalls into their operating systems. But that firewall on your computer in your operating system is typically not sufficient enough to protect your business as a whole. So a business-wide firewall, and thinking through, as people go out to the internet, how are you protecting not just your computers, but also your office equipment and your office as a whole from outside people who may be interested in your information and in your business. There are tools that look at endpoints. And so when we say endpoints, we mean your PCs, your laptops, it could be a tablet, and it could be a phone. Any number of device any device that is used to connect to the internet and to do work is considered an endpoint. And the better solutions allow you to have one solution to manage all of your endpoints, as opposed to having one solution for your desktops, one solution for your tablets, and one solution for your mobile devices. So it's just easier to manage, easier to administer. We've referenced Cisco Umbrella as one such solution that covers a majority of your endpoints. If you have a large proportion of your employees on laptops, possibly working from coffee shops, or working from home, The rule I like to kind of think about here is, do you want to play Fortnite on the same computer that you use to run your accounting software like QuickBooks?
No.
Probably not. So think about that. And it may seem fusty, or it may seem a little rigorous, or possibly even expensive. But separating and managing your personal devices and your business devices, we recommend this for all devices, but at a minimum, keeping your business devices used for business purposes as opposed to other purposes. Content filtering helps that. And there may be times when you might need to consider layers of defense, and that may lead you to selecting more than one solution, more than one tool. Like I mentioned, there may be a firewall or a content filtering solution for the office and on premises. And there may be, you may support that where your remote workforce, like your salespeople, when they go out to make sales calls, that there is a device enabled content filter on the actual devices as well. Because a lot of us are many times not physically in the office, especially these days.
Yeah, and I like to think about, you know, if I lived in a high risk area, so I lived at, you know, somewhere where the crime rate was very high, I probably wouldn't have one kind of lock on my door, right? I might have a regular lock in the doorknob, and I'd have a deadbolt, and maybe I'd have a camera. Maybe I'd have a security monitoring system, so that if the house was breached, I'd have motion sensors or whatnot inside. And I think about security for a network in the same way, that there's lots of different places that I can protect the network. So the firewall at the perimeter of the network, so that's where I have my connection of my business network to the internet. It's a good place to do content filtering. The desktops themselves are a good place to do it, and the laptops. So there's a number of different areas where we can insert these protections. And, you know, again, you're going to need to evaluate what you're trying to protect, what the value of that data is, and what investments you need to make in these tools.
I think that's relevant to our next topic around password protection. So I think a lot of people have almost been worn out on this topic. So we're going to kind of keep it pretty simple. And I like Meredith's analogy of, I have different locks on my door, depending on the neighborhood that I live in, or the type of person that I'm trying to keep out. And so a couple of points around your passwords. They need to be unique. And just like you would not have one key for every lock on your door, you should not have one password to share across all of your different business and personal accounts. And there's a recent breach, 250 million passwords were stolen, and only 5,000 of them were unique. And so if you think about that, there's a lot of people with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 as their passwords. And that may not be you, but do not share them across platforms. If somebody has your Netflix password or your Zoom password, does that mean they can access your bank? So make them unique, make them complex. So a lot of us are used to passwords that are 8 characters long, that have numbers, letters, and symbols. There's a growing emphasis now on 12-character passwords. But you know, for right now at this moment in time, making it 12 characters or longer will make it much exponentially harder to crack. To run it against that database of 250 million stolen passwords and then try to crack it, a complex, unique password is going to be awfully difficult to crack open. A key point here, and this question came across as we were preparing for this, I have a lot of different accounts. How do I create a unique password for each of those different accounts? Password management tools are helpful. There are many free ones that you can purchase from reputable companies that can manage your passwords for you. They, you know, understand them before you pick one and set one up. But another device and another solution is, if you think about a sentence, you know, obviously not the quick brown fox or never the lazy dog, but think of a sentence and start swapping out the vowels or the symbol, the vowels in some of the letters for symbols. And if that's a sentence, and if you have a series of sentences that you use for your different passwords, that'll make it easier to remember and still be unique and still be complex.
I think, the other key here is passwords are sometimes not enough. And you'll see that a lot of services are now beginning to offer multi-factor authentication, or MFA. And what MFA means is I go to a site, I put in my username and my password, and then I get sent a code to my cell phone. And the next screen prompts me to put that code in. So you've probably seen it with your banking sites for sure. But we definitely recommend that you use it with your email. So it's built into Microsoft 365, Office 365. You can use multi-factor authentication. Google also has it. And those are the two key players that we usually see in the commercial email space for the small and medium-sized businesses. So it's definitely there for those two. And in fact, when I do a client benchmark report of their IT environment against best practices, if they don't have multi-factor authentication for their email and other internet-facing services, or services that are accessible from the internet that have their business data, it is automatically identified in our highest risk category. So consider multi-factor authentication on your email, on any other work account that you have that is on an internet-facing site, so anything you use a browser to get to. Definitely banking, for sure. So if you're in QuickBooks Online, you want to make sure you're using that multi-factor authentication, but also in your personal accounts. So I joke, I have multi-factor authentication on my Amazon and Facebook accounts. Amazon, because I might have teenagers, and they, if they got my password, could they order things and maybe deliver them to Matt's house? So I don't even know. And Facebook, it's important, right? There's a lot of my kids and my life history sits in Facebook, and if I lost access to that, it would be pretty devastating, right? So that's kind of the scrapbook of our life at this point. So anywhere you can is my advice. Anywhere you can use multi-factor authentication, use it. So if you go to the account settings in, like I mentioned, Amazon and Facebook, LastPass. So certainly if you're using a password management service, it is a best practice to use multi-factor authentication there. Financial systems, so QuickBooks, anywhere that you can, check the account settings on the website and look for two-step or multi-factor authentication and get it set up. It can be an absolute lifesaver.
Right, and I think the equivalent I use is they continue the lock on the door analogy. This is like looking over your shoulder to make sure somebody's not standing behind you and going to walk in behind you. So you do that when you get into the car. You could do that when you enter a home or a house. It may seem like an extra step, but it can be absolutely essential in terms of a simple thing. Maybe it adds another minute or two to your login experience, but it will be fundamental in terms of protecting you from a breach or an attack.
And I believe, Matt, in all cases that I've seen systems with multi-factor authentication, it is included in your account. So there's no additional fee to do it.
Right.
There's a little bit of a productivity hit, as you mentioned, right? I have to go get the code from my phone. And I will admit that sometimes I'm very frustrated. Where's my phone? And I have to go grab it so I can get into whatever this is. But in most cases, it's you can say to always trust this browser, right? So if I log into Amazon from my phone and I log in with multi-factor, and then I say trust this device the next time, it won't ask for my phone. So you can mitigate that annoyance factor a little bit also, but it is a critical key factor in protecting your accounts.
I find that it's been helpful to make me pause and question, do I really need that case of hot sauce from Amazon? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no.
Or the 2 pounds of yeast, which everyone needs right now.
We are growing our own bread in the Kutzel household. If you would like some, the bakery will be open on Fridays.
And we have a comment that says hot sauce is always necessary.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to everyone's favorite topic, which is maintenance and updates. everyone loves it when they go to shut down their PC and they have to wait for 20 minutes because Windows updates are running. That said, maintaining up-to-date equipment and operating systems is critical in protecting against risk from outside forces. So, many times we see that there's a delay in businesses for updating equipment. It's expensive, right? Replacing a PC is, if you're getting a good business class PC, is going to run you around $800 to $1,000. So it's not a small investment. And upgrading the operating systems, we all went through over the past couple of years. We were working with our clients to say, Windows 7 was going end of life, which meant that Microsoft wasn't offering security patches for it anymore. So we, over the past 2-3 years, we're working with our clients to budget for and then implement upgrades to Windows 10, so that we could get rid of that attack surface, right? If a risk was found in Windows 7 and it wasn't patched, those systems would be forever vulnerable. So, as the slide mentions, there are toolkits online that these cyber criminals who are making a business out of this are selling those toolkits to help other people perpetuate attacks on older systems. And because those older systems really never get patched, they're pretty easy to exploit. And patching can mean a number of different things. It means your Windows updates, right? That's the operating system update. If I have a firewall, I want to make sure that the firmware, which is really just the operating system for the hardware, is getting updated, because firewall certainly as our perimeter defense at the point where the internet meets our business network. We want to make sure that that has the right security features in it, which means getting it updated. So there's a lot of patching and updating and keeping things up to current standards that are important. So really what you want to do, you want to have an inventory of your devices that you keep current. For our client, we have some agents deployed on their computers, which gives us an automatic inventory. It collects all the data and puts it into our systems for us, so we can look for those older devices and software, but keep an inventory. Whether it's in an Excel spreadsheet or you're working with an outside company to maintain that for you, it's a great idea to know what you have. So what kind of devices do you have, and what are they running? What software are they running? What operating systems? What firmware? So that's on the network equipment. We want to know what operating systems or firmware the network devices are running. If you find that you have older things that are considered end of life, and end of life means that the manufacturer is no longer supporting it or patching it, make a plan to get those systems and software up to date, and get a priority order. So you want to start with your critical systems. If you're running your financial systems on older hardware or software, that's going to be a key place to start. So make your list and prioritize it. And then once you've got yourself up to date, have a plan to stay current. So, on the Windows operating system side, which many of us are working with, the graphic shows Patch Tuesday. So the second Tuesday of every month, Microsoft releases their updates. We have Vertical 6 automatically deploy those to our client endpoints and servers. So that's desktops, laptops, servers. We automatically deploy them, usually starting a week after Patch Tuesday, right? We want to give them time to have problems on other people's devices before we are rolling them out across all the devices that we're managing. And also have a schedule to be updating your equipment. So, business tolerances for older hardware, it really varies. Many are in the 3 years. So at about 3 years, we're looking at replacing a desktop or a laptop, so that we can maintain productivity levels. So I tend to look less at age and more at, can people get their work done? Because the older the systems are, the better the harder time they're going to have managing. The systems won't have the resources to manage current applications, which slows people down, it gets frustrating for people and has a major productivity impact. So in addition to the security side of this, we always look at how much time are people losing staring at the spinning ball on the screen, and how much is that costing you, right? So if I have somebody sitting for an hour a day waiting for things on their PC, that's 1/8 of their 8-hour day, and that's a lot of productivity loss as well. But certainly we want to make sure that things are up to date from a security standpoint as well. Sorry, Matt.
It's ironic sometimes. We had a client who the CEO of the firm, and it was a supplier and retail firm. The CEO had an older laptop, and they would complain about how slow it was, and they believed that they had several viruses on the machine, but we could never get her to let us replace it. And I imagine that in many respects, it's out of that fear of, I can't stop working. So we understand and we hear that a lot of you are probably in that place. If I can't stop working, and the last time I got a new machine or updated my machine or computer, it ended up causing problems. So that's, I think, part of why we were saying make a plan, and make note of what is out of date and what is older, because more than likely, in addition, like Meredith said, to replacing equipment and updating your software, it's not only more secure, but it's just faster. And ultimately, we did get the computer from her. We did replace it, white glove service, made sure she was happy, and she was much happier. Faster machine, was able to get back to work pretty quickly, but also securely.
Absolutely. And it is disruptive, right? It is disruptive to get a new device. No matter how hard we try to get all the data in the right places and all the settings the way they were, there's always some setting that was critical to the person that we have to go back in and fix. But there's also tools like when we're in the Office 365 space and we're using OneDrive, that really makes the transition easier, because all you have to do is sign into your 365 account and your data is populating. So there are tools that can make it easier, but from a security and productivity standpoint, we want to make sure that there's a regular budgeted schedule for replacements. We typically say 3 years is about right, but some go 5 or 6, and as long as we're patching and keeping the operating systems up to date and the productivity is there, and it's fine to extend that out a little bit.
So, if you do have an older machine running, you're probably familiar with, having separate antivirus, anti-malware software. I think, when I first got a computer in the late 90s, I bought antivirus solution from McAfee, and some of those providers and some of those software vendors are still around. And so, the key thing here is that even if you have a Apple machine, you still need an antivirus or an anti-malware solution. Even with some of the built-in defenses that Microsoft is providing with Windows Defender, it is wise to have a separate antivirus and anti-malware solution. Again, depending on how much risk tolerance you have and how much budget you have. So keeping that in mind, the viruses are classes of applications that replicate themselves and they insert themselves into other programs. And malware is a class of application that is a specific program that is designed to disrupt, damage, or gain unauthorized access. And so in either way, the antivirus or anti-malware solutions that you're probably familiar with if you've had a computer or machine for any amount of time, those solutions are still valid and still necessary.
And so, the endpoints are critical. And, as Matt mentioned, Microsoft does have Defender on every machine. And if you don't have anything else, it is an excellent idea to enable that free tool. So we look at the device, we look at the network. So we've talked about the firewalls that provide that perimeter protection, the gate between the internet and your business network. And then we also use solutions like Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection and Office 365. So ATP, as I call it, can scan links in emails to make sure that they are appropriate. So this is another content filtering. It can look at attachments to make sure that there's no malware in the attachments. And actually ATP can also help with those impersonation emails. So the emails that people get from looking like they're from their boss saying, can you go buy the gift cards for me? So ATP has the ability to also stop the impersonation attacks, which is pretty key. The clients that we have that have enabled ATP in their Office 365 environments have been very pleased with the results. And you know, G Suite will also have a set of tools that are pretty good. But you know, you want to look at all those antivirus, anti-malware points of entry to make sure that you're hitting wherever you can, again, within the context of what your business needs.
And as we get close to wrapping up here, as we come up on the top of the hour, you know, part of it, and I think Meredith alluded to it around, you know, our devices and our anti-malware and anti-virus solutions is that consistency. And so consistent application and looking at the big picture. So as a business owner, as a business operator, as an entrepreneur, it's not just enough to secure your devices, your laptop, your tablet, your phone, but you need to look at your team, your colleagues. Are they secure as well? Have they been trained? Do they understand? Do they know what phishing is? Let's start with that from our first session. But also, are these tools and are these solutions being consistently applied? So it's good to have a conversation with them, even if it's a 2 to 5 person business. How are we protecting ourselves? How are we secure? Do we know that we should not be going into bad neighborhoods on the internet? Do we agree? Maybe we write that up as a policy and then pick a solution to filter content. Do we have personal devices and business devices? What are we going to install on those to protect them and keep them safe? But it's about consistency. And, you know, frankly, a lot of the founders, a lot of the entrepreneurs, a lot of the owners are the ones who are the worst about it. And so they'll apply these solutions and tools to the staff and to the teams. But anybody with a C-level title, those tend to be the first people to deactivate some of these solutions. And so that's part of why we are advising that you think through this process. It's a scary time right now, but think through the process instead of just rushing out and buying software, buying solutions that you're going to just simply opt out of a few weeks later. It's that inconsistency that adversaries like to exploit, because if they can find the weak link, and many times it's the owner or the founder, if they can find the weak link, then they will happily pursue that weak link and they will try it over and over and over again.
And I think, Matt, too, the other piece with the consistency, and you were mentioning, you know, not making exceptions for your senior people. It's important that that is led from the top, right? That the top people in the company are supporting and advocating for the use of the tools, because that will make it more acceptable for your group of employees to use those tools, right? They will embrace them better if there is advocacy from the top. So I had a client who, for a couple of years, was pushing back on multi-factor authentication in their email, and their CEO did have his mailbox breached a couple of times. And we finally convinced them that maybe at least the CEO should have multi-factor authentication on his mailbox, and they agreed that they would do that, but still were kind of hesitant for the rest of the company. And as it kept happening, as the breaches kept happening, so people were falling for the scams where you click a link and it says to put in your username and password, and their mailboxes were getting breached. You know, we finally said, you know, it's really time to do this. And the message that went out to that organization from the CEO was, if I can do it, all of you can too, right? So
That's
if
right.
your CEO was saying, this is so important that I'm doing it, and he's not a computer techie kind of guy,
right.
but he made the point to all of his people so there could be no complaints that multi-factor was the way they were going.
And we are coming up, I think we've got a hard stop here. And so to that point, you know, consistency, transparency, and gradual improvement, nobody's perfect. And that is why that's at the bottom of this checklist, of the shopping list, is that without that, these individual solutions and these tools will probably fail. So this is part of your overall culture, your overall strategy that you're building. In terms of resources that are available for you to use, there's some good ones out there to understand, have your passwords or have your accounts been breached? And then there's the point about Cisco Umbrella and using your existing built-in defenses because they are free and already in your computers and your devices, most likely. And then please join us on Friday, where we're going to talk about how to get help, because you are not alone in this. You know, we've given you some tools. The individuals and the entities and companies that we're going to talk to you about on Friday can help you use those tools wisely. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Take care.